Publius Aemilius Paulus sits on his horse in the pre-dawn haze near a small town called Cannae in southeastern Italy. The air smells of dust and horse sweat. Around him, roughly 86,000 Roman and allied soldiers are forming up across the open plain, the largest army Rome has ever put into a single battle. Paulus does not like this ground. There is no room to maneuver, and a hot wind called the Vulturnus is about to blow straight into his men's faces, carrying dust into their eyes. By the end of this day, most of the men standing around him will be dead. Rome had built this army for one purpose: to end Hannibal Barca once and for all. For 2 years, the Carthaginian general had marched through Italy, defeating Roman armies at the Trebia and at Lake Trasimene, where he had ambushed and killed an entire consular army in a single morning. Rome's response was to raise the largest force in its history, 8 legions plus an equal number of allied troops, commanded jointly by 2 consuls, Paulus and Gaius Terentius Varro, who alternated command by the day. Rome believed that overwhelming numbers would finally crush Hannibal's smaller, exhausted army. They were right that they had more men than Hannibal ever had at his disposal. They were catastrophically wrong about what Hannibal intended to do, with the difference. Hannibal's army numbered somewhere around 50,000 men, Carthaginians, Numidians, Gauls, and Iberians, a patchwork of allies held together mostly by loyalty to Hannibal himself rather than to Carthage. His infantry, especially the Gallic and Iberian troops in the centre, was considered by many Roman officers to be less disciplined than the legions, more prone to breaking under pressure. What Rome underestimated was his cavalry, roughly 10,000 horsemen, including the famous Numidian light cavalry, which outnumbered and outclassed the Roman horse on both flanks. The Greek historian Polybius, writing decades later using testimony from men who had fought there, recorded that the Roman command believed sheer weight of infantry numbers packed into a narrow front would break through anything Hannibal put in front of them. So, how did an army nearly twice the size of its enemy end up annihilated in a single afternoon? The answer began with the shape of the battlefield itself. On the morning of August 2nd, 216 BC, a date modern historians treat as reasonably solid based on the ancient calendar reconstructions, Varro, in command that day, deployed the Roman infantry in a formation deeper and narrower than usual, packing the maniples closer together to maximize the crushing power of the legions in the centre. It was Hannibal who had chosen this exact plain near the Aufidus River, and it was Hannibal who let the Romans pack themselves into that dense mass without offering any resistance to where they set up. The first stage of the trap wasn't a maneuver. It was simply choosing not to interfere. The second stage came from the shape Hannibal gave his own line. Rather than matching the Roman formation with a straight or reinforced centre, Hannibal arranged his Gallic and Iberian infantry in a shallow crescent that bulged outward toward the Romans, thin in depth, curved forward. His more reliable African infantry he held back on the flanks, in reserve, out of the initial clash. Polybius describes this deployment specifically as deliberate, not improvised. When the Roman legions surged forward into that curved centre, they pushed the Gauls and Iberians backward, exactly as Hannibal expected. The crescent began to buckle inward, and to the Roman soldiers pressing forward it must have felt like victory. What they didn't realize is that they were being funneled. As the bulge collapsed into a shallow crescent bending the other way, the Roman mass kept advancing into the pocket, packing tighter and tighter until men in the middle ranks could barely lift their arms to fight, At the same moment on the wings, Hannibal's cavalry was finishing its own separate battle. On the Roman left, the Roman cavalry, heavily outnumbered, was broken by Hasdrubal's Iberian and Gallic horsemen. Hasdrubal, rather than pursuing the fleeing Roman cavalry off the field, wheeled his squadrons and rode across the rear of the battle to hit the Roman cavalry on the opposite wing from behind, catching it between his own force and Hannibal's Numidians. Both Roman cavalry wings collapsed in sequence. There is a specific moment ancient sources describe where a Roman officer must have understood, for the first time, that something had gone catastrophically wrong. Not because the centre was losing ground, since it was still advancing, but because the sound of fighting had begun coming from behind them. Hannibal's African infantry, held in reserve on the flanks, now turned inward and struck the packed Roman formation on both sides, while Hasdrubal's cavalry, having destroyed both Roman cavalry wings, arrived to seal the last open side. The Roman army, still numerically enormous, was now surrounded on every side by a smaller force, with no room to fight, retreat, or even fall back in order. What followed, according to Polybius and later Livy, was less a battle in its final hour than a controlled slaughter. Packed too tightly to use their weapons properly, Roman soldiers in the interior of the mass reportedly could not even raise their arms. Livy's account, written roughly 2 centuries later and drawing on earlier sources now lost, describes scenes of men digging holes in the ground to bury their own faces and suffocate rather than face further violence, a detail modern historians treat with some skepticism as likely rhetorical embellishment, though the broader collapse and mass killing is not seriously disputed. Ancient sources place Roman and Allied losses at staggering levels. Polybius states around 70,000 killed. Livy gives a somewhat different figure, closer to 50,000 to 55,000 dead, with thousands more captured. And while modern historians debate the precision of ancient casualty figures generally, there is wide agreement that Cannae remains one of the single bloodiest days in ancient military history, quite possibly the highest one-day death toll in any battle prior to the modern era. If the higher end of the ancient estimate is accurate, it means Rome may have lost somewhere close to 80,000 men, soldiers and officers combined, in a single afternoon of fighting. Among the dead was Paulus himself, one of the 2 consuls, killed fighting on foot after his horse was cut down, according to Livy's account of his final hours. Also killed were reportedly 80 senators serving in the ranks, along with a significant portion of Rome's entire military and political leadership class for that generation, a detail that underscores how thoroughly Cannae gutted not just Rome's army, but its governing elite. Varro, the surviving consul, escaped the field with a small group of cavalry, and in one of the more remarkable moments of Roman political history, was met on his return to Rome, not with punishment for the disaster, but with formal thanks from the Senate for not despairing of the Republic, a moment Roman writers later held up as an example of the Republic's unusual resilience in catastrophe, whatever the accuracy of the anecdote's specific wording. Hannibal, in the aftermath, was urged by his cavalry commander Maharbal, according to Livy, to march on Rome itself immediately, with Maharbal reportedly telling him, "You know how to gain victory, Hannibal, but you do not know how to use it." Hannibal declined, choosing instead to consolidate his position in southern Italy. Whether Rome would truly have fallen to a direct assault at that moment is something historians still debate. Rome's walls, reserves, and allies elsewhere in Italy may well have held even after Cannae, and some modern historians view Mahabal's line as a later rhetorical flourish rather than a settled tactical judgment. What is not disputed is that Hannibal never got closer to ending the war than he was in the days immediately following Cannae, and that he never came that close again. Rome's response to the disaster is, in some ways, more remarkable than the defeat itself. Rather than sue for peace, an option available to nearly any other ancient state after losing an army of that size, the Senate refused to negotiate, refused to ransom the captured soldiers, and began raising new legions almost immediately, eventually adopting a deliberately cautious strategy under the general Fabius Maximus, avoiding open battle with Hannibal while wearing down his position in Italy over years rather than a single afternoon. It would take another 14 years, and a different Roman general, Scipio, later called Africanus, to finally defeat Hannibal, not in Italy, but on Carthaginian soil at the Battle of Zama in 202 BC. Paulus never saw any of that. He died on a dusty plain near a small town most people had never heard of before that August morning, one of tens of thousands of men crushed into a space too small to fight in, surrounded by an enemy his own army outnumbered nearly 2-1. What the Roman command miscalculated at Cannae wasn't courage or weapons or even numbers. It was the assumption that more men packed into less space would always win. Hannibal understood something Rome didn't yet, that an army can be too large for its own battlefield, and that the deadliest trap is sometimes simply letting your enemy walk exactly where he wants to go. Subscribe to Legion Chronicles. The next story from Rome's history drops this week.